me introduce Evie. Evie is currently an associate professor of teaching and faculty tutor, as well as head of undergraduate provision at UCL-IOE. She has more than 20 years of experience delivering intervention programs for children with special educational needs and disabilities. She has also worked with various local authorities, charities, organizations, and schools across the UK to provide training for parents and teaching staff. In addition, she served as chair of the Extenuation Circumstances Panel and faculty lead for careers and employability. Evie is a graduate member of the British Psychological Society and remains highly active in research. Her research interests include learning disabilities, self-esteem, language development, psychology, and education. Okay, let's clap our hand to welcome.
Very kind of you. So what is very important is for us to understand how people develop and how children learn. So it's important to know, especially when we are teachers or educators or psychologists, that development is very complex. And what it means is it means change. So we need to change in order to be able to develop. And these changes may be typical. So that means that they follow the specific steps that we expect for the age of the person, or it may be atypical. So that means that they follow a different pathway or a different time. But what is important to remember is that development starts from the moment of conception, so at the moment that the baby is conceived, and it stops on the day we die. So there is a huge development phase from conception to death, and all the stages are important. And it's important. Some people think that development starts when the baby is born, but that's not true. It starts at the minute of conception. And very often, what will happen in these 9 months of pregnancy are very important for the development of the child. And we do know that children whose mothers had difficulties at pregnancy are more likely to have developmental difficulties later on in life. So the capacity that we have to change is called plasticity. And our brain, obviously, is a very highly plastic organ. And that's what we are using to develop. So when we're thinking about development and child development, we need to understand that there are two sides. It's the nature, so it's our genes, what we are born with, our traits, our abilities, our characteristics, our specific DNA and chromosomes. But also it's the environment, what are the social and cultural factors that contribute to our development. And it's important to know that there is a relationship between environment and genes, and one can affect the other. So, for example, if we have the gene to develop dyslexia, then we are going to develop it, and that's in our nature. But if, for example, we know that one of our parents has dyslexia, or that, it's running in the family, then we know we are at risk. And that means that if we put an early intervention in place, that's environmental input, then we may determine the nature, we may determine the genes. We will still have dyslexia, but maybe not as severe as if we hadn't put the intervention in place. And vice versa, if we have someone who has, let's say, autism, and that's genetic, then this may affect the environment in that the parents or the school will need to adapt in order to meet the needs of that person. So the environment and the genes, the nature and the nurture, both interact and contribute to the child's development. So when we look in the classroom, when we look into education, we need to understand that it's not only what is happening within the child, that they may have one of the special educational needs difficulties or typically developing children. We also need to think about their environment. What is the environment at home? What is the environment in the classroom? What is the environment in the church they are going or in different activities? Because all these are going to contribute. So it's not only what the child characteristics, abilities are, it's also all the environmental input that contribute. And then usually, if we translate this into classroom, we have two sides. In a nurtured classroom, the teacher is the person that knows everything and is trying to train the child to memorize the information and reproduce it. So this is when we're talking about nurture in the classroom. The person, the key person with the knowledge, the teacher or the other children, more mature or whatever is in the classroom, whoever is in the classroom, they are the ones that have all the knowledge, and then they need to pass this knowledge to the child. So the child is only reading to remember and to reproduce the information. When we think about nature, though, we see that the teacher wants to understand how the child is learning and wants to have a dialogue with the child. And they want to help the child develop an understanding of their own. So there is more emphasis and there is more, priority on what the child can do already, and then the teacher helping them. So if you think about it, when you were students at school, maybe you will identify that when you were in kindergarten or in the early years, we have more of a nature style. Yes, we are having the teacher trying to help the children to learn to play, to understand, and the children are showing how they are learning, what they know, and things like that. But when we are going to secondary school or when we grow older, it's more of a nurture style. The teacher has the knowledge, needs to pass the knowledge to the child in order to be able to pass the exams. They need to do all the learning and all these things. So we see that in education, we go from nature to nurture style in learning. So, and there is no one is right and one is wrong. I believe that we need to have a balance, but we don't always have a balance. We usually see nature early years and nurture later on. And I think that's because of the pressure. Children have a lot of pressure to pass exams, to learn information by heart, and to be able to get good grades. So when we are developing, and we said that development means change, we change because we learn new things. So when we talk about learning, we mean the means by which all the experiences that we get can produce permanent change in our behaviors, in our thoughts, and in our feelings. So we learn to behave in a specific way. We learn to think in a specific way. We learn that our feelings sometimes are, good or bad, or they are expressed in the specific way when we are angry, sad, or happy. So what I would like you to do is I would like us to join the Mentimeter again, the same Mentimeter. But what I would like you to do is think of an experience, a learning experience that you had. And that could be learning how to read, learning another language, learning in Catalina's class, learning a new instrument, learning how to drive a car, learning how to use a computer, learning another language, any learning experience you had lately. We all learn at all times. And I want you to think, what helped your learning? What were the things that happened that helped you with your learning experience? So I'm going to go to the Menti so I can see your answers. So let's see. So let's see what helped you while you were learning. Think about it a little bit, any activity. And hopefully we will have a very long list of things. Thank you very much to the first person. Yes, practice and reflection on what we have learned. Very good. A good teacher, of course. You need someone who knows very well what they need to teach you, and they are there by your side. Very, very good answers. Well done. So we have practice, and the opportunity to practice obviously means time. So we need time for learning. Yes. A patient teacher. Yes, many people say that. A teacher in good presentation with passion and love for learning and for the children. Knowing the strengths and weaknesses, very important. To know what we are good at, what we can do and what we cannot do is very important. Yes, different experiences and different children in the classroom. Yes. So sometimes we learn from other children, not always from the teacher. Sometimes we learn from other children or from even younger people than us, you know. Sometimes you may have a child who is 10 and they don't know how to ride a bike, but you have a child that is 7 and knows how to ride a bike, and they can teach each other. So anyone who knows a little bit more about that learning than us is a good opportunity and experience. What else? A good environment. Yes, we need, and on that I'm going to say we need resources, yeah? You can't learn how to ride a bike if you don't have a bike. Yes, you can't learn how to play the guitar if you don't have a guitar. So, you can't learn how to walk if you don't have legs. You know, we need to think, what is it that we need in order to be able to learn? We need to be mentally and physically healthy in order to be able to do that. Curiosity and interest in the topic. Yes, thank you very much. We want to be interested and motivated, you know, to learn. If it's something that we find boring, there is no way we're going to put effort into learning. Learning history in secondary school, fictions and storybooks more interesting than textbook. Yes, so you need interesting material. Yeah, you know, if you have just a book with writing, no pictures or nothing interactive, then you find it boring. So you need that good material and motivation. You need government to provide guideline to student learning and listen teacher share their experience. Yes, you need the whole school, the whole education system, and the whole policies, education policies in the country to promote the learning and to value the learning and hear the voice of the teachers and those who are within the school and the learning environment. So you need to also, as a learner, you need to be able to have a voice. Yes, you need to be able to say, I don't understand that, or I need help with this. You need, as a learner, you also need to understand that it's okay to make mistakes because we learn from our mistakes. So you need that. And you also need confidence. You need to feel confident to have a good relationship with your teacher. If you have to learn from someone you don't like, then there is no point that you're going to engage in the learning. Is there anything else that people feel we need that can help us with our learning experience? A lot of time to practice, a teacher or someone who knows better, a good environment, resources. We need the confidence, the motivation. We need the support from everyone in the environment. So this is quite a long list of things that we need. And these are the things that we need in order for learning to take place. Now, when I asked you the question, I said in my presentation, I said what helped and what hindered, what was a problem for your learning. And the thing is, we don't need to discuss what hindered, what stopped your learning, because what would stop your learning is the absence of everything we said. So if you don't have a good teacher, if you don't have resources, if you don't have motivation, if you don't have health, mental and physical, if you don't have other children and people you want people to believe in you, your parents, your teachers to say, I believe you can succeed. If you don't have these, you can't learn. So we need, if learning is making a cake, we need all these ingredients. You can't make a cake only with flour. You need flour, you need sugar, you need icing, you need oil, butter, and all the things. So in order to have a good learning experience, if you think about it as a cake, we need all the ingredients to be there in order to have positive learning experience. If we are missing one thing, then learning won't happen. It will not be as a pleasant experience. So we need to make sure as teachers, educators within a school setting or within an educational setting that we give all the ingredients to the students. So when we are looking into special educational needs and disabilities, we need all these ingredients to make it work, because that's how we learn. Everybody learns needs all the ingredients to be able to learn. But when there are some specific difficulties, they have specific ways of learning, and they have specific labels that support or not the learning. In the UK, and a bit more generic in the world, we use 4 categories. We call them 4 areas of need. One has to do with cognition and learning. And on that category, we have all these children who may have dyslexia or moderate, severe, and profound learning difficulties. Then we have the social, emotional, and mental health difficulties. And these you may have heard of: attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or anxiety and depression, or eating disorders, or self-harming. Then we have communication and interaction needs. So we talk about children who may be autistic, be on the autism spectrum disorder, or speech and language and communication needs. And then we have the sensory or physical needs that have to do with physical disabilities, medical needs, visual impairment, hearing impairment, and multisensory difficulties. So we are dividing the special educational needs and disabilities in 4 categories in order to be able to understand what the needs are, because those who have dyslexia will have different needs sometimes than those who have ADHD, than those who have autism, than those who are blind. So we need to take care of all the children, but at the same time, I understand their differences based on their needs. So when we diagnose special educational needs and disabilities, we always need to take a history for the child's development. Remember, development starts at the minute of conception. So we need to know, did anything happen when the mother was pregnant? Were there any issues? And then get the history. How was the child at school and everything? We need to listen to the views of the family and the school. We need to hear from everyone, because we need to understand whether there are any specific difficulties only in one place. If we have a child, for example, that is withdrawn or isn't engaging at school, it's not necessary that they have special educational needs. Maybe something is happening at home that is making them uncomfortable at school. We need then to analyze the behaviors the child is exhibiting, what are they behaving like? And then we will use the tools. And you may have heard of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, the DSM, or the International Classification of Diseases. So these are the most common in the world that are used for identifying and diagnosing special educational needs. Now, as an educator, very often you may have parents who find it very difficult to accept that their child has a problem. And sometimes they may not want their child to have a diagnosis or a label. And, there are two sides on the labeling, and I wanted to make you aware of these. So, for example, when we have a diagnosis or a label, let's say this child has autism or this child has dyslexia, then this obviously is opening the door for resources, because that means these children may get extra money from the government, or the school may put a specialist teacher, or they will get extra, teaching and time and resources. However, at the same time, this child, because they have a label, maybe they start losing the consideration about the nature of the intervention that is needed for that specific child. Then labeling can lead to awareness, so it can raise awareness and understanding for teachers and parents and other children. However, sometimes it may lead to stigmatization, and especially in cultures where children with special educational needs are seen as not being normal or having a problem or not being good enough, then this can lead to a stigmatization. It may be that having a label can reduce ambiguities or provide clear communication devices for professionals. So you can say, oh, this child has autism, maybe a timetable, visual timetable will help. But then it's very difficult to decide on a specific label. So a child that is diagnosed as autistic in Hong Kong and then, let's say, moves to London, will they have the same needs and the same expectations, considering the environment? Remember what we said, culture and everything may be much different. Then sometimes having a label may be comfort for families and children because it's explaining the difficulties. Sometimes we have even students at university who have gone through the education not understanding there was a difficulty, and then they go to university and have an assessment and see that they were dyslexic. And then they say, oh, that was my issue all these years at school. It's not that I was stupid or that I couldn't do things. It's because I have a difficulty. So for the parents and the children, it's creating this peace and understanding that there is an explanation. However, this sometimes, on the other side, may create lower expectations. So a teacher, when they know a child has dyslexia or autism, may not be as, pushing the child to succeed because they use the difficulty as an excuse that the child can't do well enough. And then the other thing is that having a label, having a diagnosis sometimes is supporting people with a sense of belonging because, oh, I have dyslexia too, or we both have depression, or we both have anxiety. So it makes you feel there are other people like you and you share this sense of belonging. But the other argument can be that labeling can lead to teasing and can lead to bullying and low self-esteem. So as you can see, it's good to have a diagnosis and a label for a special educational need in some occasions, but it has its negatives as well. And as teachers or educators, we need to think of both sides when we're advising parents and others about what to do. So what is very important is to look at the teaching approaches and the programs in relation to the individual and not in relation to the label. So when we are looking at interventions, it's best to see, does this intervention fit, May or Sophie or Kat, or does it not? We shouldn't think, oh, this intervention is only for autism, or is only for dyslexia, or is only for that. We need to see what is the child's needs. And as you said very well earlier, you said you need to know the weaknesses and the strengths so that you can teach and support a child in the classroom. So when we are looking into the children with special educational needs and disabilities, we need to think about all the factors that could be affecting the child. And we did say earlier about factors that have to do with nature. So we are talking about children's diagnoses, autism, dyslexia, ADHD, depression, anxiety, eating disorder. But we also need to think of all the other factors that contribute to the child. So some of these factors, all of these factors can be positive or negative. Yeah, because, for example, if we look at social, home, and environmental factors, and we look at role models, if a child has a role model, someone who behaves well, then they will develop positively and they will do well. But they may have a role model, someone who isn't behaving well, someone who isn't doing good things. So even though role modeling can be positive, it can also be negative. Yes? And parenting and socioeconomic factors. You may have a child that is coming from a poor family, but then the parents are managing to support the child with their learning. But you may have a family from children who are many parents who are very wealthy. They have a lot of money, a lot of food, a lot of everything, but they don't spend time with their child and they are not parenting their child very well. So the factor can be positive and negative for the child. Similarly, if you think about, if you think about life experience, for example, sometimes you may have a child that their father died. So this can be negative because, the child lost their father and this is making them sad and is going to affect their education. But what if this father was abusing the child? The fact that the father died is probably, good for the child because they are relieved. And same as you said for changing schools and the relationships, the child may go into a school that is not treating them well. If you think about the medical factors and the difficulties within the child, if the child has learning difficulties or sensory difficulties, yes, this can be difficult and it's going to be very difficult to teach. But every child, I believe that every person has a strength. We all have something we're very good at. Even those children who have very severe difficulties, they always have something they are very good at. And we have to identify these strengths, these talents, in order to help us to teach them and help them learn. So if, for example, you have a child that is very good at singing but cannot read, then you can use singing and music to help them to learn the sounds and the letter names and to support with their reading. So we can always use the strengths in order to teach the weaknesses and help the children. And also for the cognitive factors, it's important to build the self-esteem. If a child has very high self-esteem, they understand from the teacher or the parents, we believe in you, you can do it, you know. And, you know, I always ask my daughter when she comes home, she said, oh, I didn't do well in the test. I said, did you do your best? And if she says yes, I say, your best is good enough. You know, if we know that we do our best, then that's success, you know, that's important. Even if you don't get the best grade, it means that you tried, and that's what we need to motivate and support. So when we are having children in the classroom, there is a lot of stress. We have to think how to support the children that are developing typically. We need to think about all the children with their special educational needs. But for every child, we need to have maybe that little diagram so we can learn who our children are. So if anyone becomes a teacher, or if we have any teacher in the class, maybe it helps put the child's name in the middle and think about all the different factors. What are those that are protective? So, for example, good parents, supporting and everything. Not very good friendships, has a special educational needs, is afraid to read, you know, and then we have a picture of what are the factors that affect the child and the child's learning. And if we have this picture, we are able to identify the targets. We want to work on this. On their reading, who can help us? The parent who is a good role model, or who can help us? You know, they don't get on well with this other child. Let's not make them sit together in class. So we identify what are the protectors and what are the risks for every child. And this can help us design the curriculum. Okay, so now, one of the things that are very important in the classroom is how can we include those children who have special educational needs? Because this is very important. You know, we are talking about inclusion since the previous century. Some of you probably weren't even born in 1994. But that's when there was a very big UNESCO meeting that happened in Spain. That's why it's called Salamanca Statement. Salamanca is a town in Spain. And the UNESCO Salamanca Statement was agreed by 92 governments and 25 international organizations in 1994. And China was one of the pioneers, was one of the first countries to support this statement. And I would like you to think whether you see evidence of that in your schools. So what they agreed, what they signed, was that all children have a right to be educated and must be given the opportunity to go to school. Okay? So they agreed, all the governments, that all children should be educated, not taken care in hospitals or in institutions, to be educated, to learn. And they need to do that in schools that are ordinary. So ordinary schools, not special schools, ordinary schools should accommodate all children regardless of their physical, intellectual, social, emotional, or linguistic conditions. So they agreed in 1994 that children with special educational needs and disabilities should be educated in a mainstream school, in an ordinary school, regardless of their difficulty. And what they did is they called upon all the governments to give the highest policy and budget priority. So to invest money and to design policies that are going to improve the education systems for all children. And they said that as a matter of law or policy, they should adopt the principle of inclusive education. So children with special educational needs to be included in the schools, in the ordinary schools. So I want you to think a little bit. When you were going to school, do you remember having children with special educational needs in your classroom, in the same rooms, in the same classroom as you were going? How was that happening? Maybe have it on the back of your mind. Have you been around children who had special educational needs? And do you feel they were treated the same as all the other children in the school system? Is this happening now? If you have visited schools now, is it happening that children are included in the schools, the special educational needs children? So inclusion is a human right, and this was agreed around the world. But what is inclusion? So something that's very important is to remember that some people are talking about integration and some people are talking about inclusion, but they are two different things, because integration may mean a child with special educational needs being in the same room as others. But if they are not participating in what the others are doing, then that's not inclusion. That's integration. So inclusion is not something that is done to someone. I don't do inclusion to you. Yeah, it's involving a consideration of challenging questions about how appropriate is the education for all the children, for all the pupils. Yeah. So if we are saying that we want to talk about inclusion in a classroom, we want to talk about active participation in an environment that is removing barriers. So children with special educational needs to be able to participate in everything. So if I want to say I have an inclusive classroom, I won't have, 5 children working on maths in one table and the child with special educational needs drawing on a table in the back of the class or in another room. If I want to have inclusion, then I put all the children together, those who have special educational needs and those who do not. And I say we're going to do maths. But for the children that have very high ability, you give them difficult activities to do. And for the other child, you give blocks that they need to count, 1, 2. Everybody's doing maths. So that's inclusive. Everybody's participating at the level that is appropriate for them. That's the inclusion that we're trying to talk about. So inclusion is a need, is a human right, and should be applied in all schools. But there are a couple of issues and a couple of questions when we talk about inclusion. And the most common question is, what curriculum should the children with special educational needs have? Should they learn the same curriculum as everyone else, or should they have a different one? And sometimes it will be possible to do the same, but sometimes it will not, because, for example, once I was working with a child who was 13 years old and he had autism and he couldn't communicate and he couldn't say much. So when we met with the teacher, I said, what are the targets? And the teacher said, oh, the targets are to learn the shapes, that this is a triangle and this is a circle. But this child couldn't go to the toilet independently. So my question to the teacher is, does he really need to learn the shapes if he cannot go to the toilet independently? We need to identify what does the child need to learn first. Then we put priorities. If a child is not able to ask for water when they are thirsty, even if it is to show in a picture or to sign or to say it, then what is the point of learning 1 + 1 = 2? We need to think priorities first. How can we make this child more independent so that they can then learn more skills? We need to start with the basic. Then the other question is, should we have a label or should we not? And we did discuss the difficulties that labeling is bringing, but also the benefits. So the big question for parents usually is, should I take my child to a professional and get a diagnosis and a label or not? And then another issue is, who is responsible for, who is in control of the child with special educational needs? Is it the parent? It's my child, I'm responsible, I know what's best? Or is it the professionals, the teachers, who understand what the child's needs are? How are we going to find this balance and communication between parents and teachers, especially in societies where, as we said, having a child with special educational needs is considered shame? And there are people that are ashamed to say, I have a mental health difficulty or my child has autism. We know that this is an issue. In some religions and in some countries, having a child with special educational needs is seen as punishment. Some parents think they are punished for something they did wrong and that God gave them a child with needs. So it's very difficult and different across the countries and the world. And then the final question in inclusion is, where should this child learn? Should they go into a special school only with special needs children, or should they go in an ordinary, in a mainstream school? This is a big question. And, you know, what we know from research, it doesn't really matter, because what we see is that if inclusion is correct and if the teaching is correct, it doesn't matter what the environment is. What matters is what's happening in that environment. You may have a child in a special school with a brilliant teacher and they will do very well, but you may have a child in a mainstream ordinary school with a really bad teacher and then they won't learn anything. So it doesn't matter where, it's how. How are we going to teach the child? How are we going to include them? So inclusion is a process. It's not a fixed state. You know, we need, when we're talking about inclusive classrooms, it's not we did something on Monday and that's it, we are inclusive. We have to keep reviewing things. We need to keep working on things. We need to collaborate. We need to collaborate with parents, with other professionals. If a child has speech difficulties, we need to collaborate with the speech and language therapist. If a child has autism, we need to collaborate with a psychologist. If a child has a physical need, we need to collaborate with the occupational therapist or the physiotherapist. So we need all this collaboration. So it's not about teaching everyone the same, but working differently with the pupils. It's about working with the children and not trying to treat them, because the truth is that developmental difficulties cannot be cured. Okay, so autism, dyslexia, ADHD, profound difficulties, you can't give a medication and it will go away. You may sometimes need some medication to manage some symptoms, but they can't be cured. Yeah, they can be treated. We need to provide interventions that work. And something that I have put here, because I wanted you to think, to see how it would work, is this picture. And here we have, for example, 3 children, 3 people who have different height. Yeah, someone is taller, someone average, and we have a little child as well. And they want to see a match. Okay, and by that, it's like an assumption they want to see a match. The thing is, they want to access something. They want to access learning. They want to access a viewing. They want to access a service. And if you look at what's happening in reality is that usually those who have more resources, those who have more money or more contacts or more resources are going to get much more than those who only have what they need and those who don't have anything. So this is the reality of what's happening. When people talk about equality and they talk about everyone should be treated the same, this is not right, you know, because there will be some people who will need more. If you think, you know, let's say about these 3 people needing to watch the football match or whatever it is, and they have a barrier in front of them, if you give everyone one box to step on, you give everyone the same, then some people are disadvantaged because that's not what they need. They need more. So equality, giving everyone the same, doesn't work for special educational needs. What we need ideally is equity. So we need to give everyone what they need. And if you think about it in that picture, this person is tall enough, can see over the fence. This person only needs one box, but this one needs 2 in order for everyone to watch. Now, if we were thinking about liberation, which obviously would be the best thing, then we would think, rather than thinking what resources we need to give each person, we would be thinking, how can we remove the barrier? How can we remove the fence so everybody can see? So if we think about our special educational needs children in the classroom, we need to think what each child needs. And remember earlier we said about all the different factors, all the different resources that children need, and identify what we need to give to each one. But at the end of the day, we should be trying to remove the barriers. Yeah. So if you apply that to a child in your classroom, let's say, who has dyslexia, or you have a child in the class that has dyslexia, a child who has autism, and the other children that are typically developing. And you say, I want you to write 3 sentences about your favorite game. So if you give everyone the same time, everybody half an hour, then you are applying equality because everybody gets the same time, but you are not meeting the individual needs. So if you want it to be equitable, you would say the child with autism will have 1 hour, the child with dyslexia will have 45 minutes, and all the other children will have 30 minutes. So you are giving everyone what they need. But if you want it to be even more liberal and remove the barriers, you would say the child with dyslexia who cannot write can tell us verbally, and they don't have to write it. The child with autism can draw it, and then the child who can write. And this is liberation. You remove the barriers for everyone based on their needs. I hope that you understand that a little bit, because many people talk about equality and giving everyone the same, but we can't. Treating everyone the same means that we are not meeting the individual needs of special educational needs children. So when we're talking about inclusive education, all is nice, and we say in theory and in principle, you can tell me, yes, thank you, Evie, that's very nice, but we are in the classroom, how, there are issues. I know, and there are difficulties. So there are quite a few difficulties that we see can contribute to the inclusive education not always working. One is the lack of understanding of the children or from the teachers about the children's learning and the children's needs and the different ways that different children are learning. The other is that sometimes we fail to collaborate with different agencies. So sometimes you as a teacher may never meet the psychologist or the occupational therapist or the speech therapist or the doctor who is treating the child. And this is stopping the communication of understanding among professionals. The other issue, which I think is quite prominent in the UK and I think also in Hong Kong, is that the culture is pushing the children a lot to do well at school. Whoever has the best grades gets the best jobs, gets the best input, is, the best child or the best person. And we are seeing sometimes children with special educational needs as being a problem in the classroom or disrupting the classroom. And this is a problem for inclusive education. It's obviously very stressful. I know some of you probably were working in a school this morning or had other commitments to do. So, and now you have to come in the evening to listen to me speaking to you in a different language, a lot of information. I understand it's very stressful. It's very difficult to have all these things to manage and to make time to think about the different children. And it's all these negative attitudes from society, the fear that something's wrong about these children, that they are impaired, and that is making it difficult for us as teachers, psychologists, educators to meet the needs. Also, in some countries, and I'm not sure what's the case in Hong Kong, we have very large classes. If you have 30 children in the class and 5 of them have special educational needs, as a teacher or as an educator, you have all the other children to teach, and then you have all these children that have special needs, and you need to make special adjustments. But at the same time, because your curriculum is not flexible, you need to teach everyone, and you need to make sure everybody's learning and everybody gets good grades, because then people will say you're not a good teacher, or parents will say, why isn't my child learning? It's your fault. So there are these barriers and these issues, and that's why I was saying that it's important for collaboration, so parents and governments and educators and everyone and the society understand that we are talking about different needs for these children that will take time. And now I'm going to move on and talk to you about interventions and strategies, like what are the things we can do in the classroom, what are the things we can do with SEN children. And I know that some of you are working in classrooms already, or that you are actually teaching or advising parents and children and professionals and everyone. So you may have heard in your studies about Vygotsky, and you may have heard about the zone of proximal development, which is quite important, and we see very often in the teaching strategies that we identify. So what we know is that development means learning, and learning needs to has specific ingredients that need to be in place to happen. And we need to create the environment and the circumstances for children to learn. So what Vygotsky said is that the child is going through a zone where learning takes place. And he called this the zone of proximal development. So this is the zone in the middle. But in order for this to happen, we have what the child can do alone, and this is the children's comfort zone. So, for example, you knowing how to play a piece on the piano or the violin. If you play the same piece over and over, you are very comfortable playing this. You are very good, you know how to do it, and you are doing a good job. However, maybe there is another piece that you don't know at all. And this is going to be what you cannot do. And you will be anxious because obviously it may look difficult. It's something you don't know. But you need to learn. And this learning is happening in the zone of proximal development by someone else helping you to learn. So you have a teacher, you have the environment, you have the resources, you have everything we said at the beginning in order for you to learn. And that's the learning zone. So the learning zone is between what we can do independently and comfortably, what we cannot do, but in the middle is what we can do with the help of someone else, someone who is more knowledgeable, either another child or another teacher or the parent or whoever is there to guide us. And within this zone of proximal development is where learning takes place. So Vygotsky said that what is important is to use a scaffolding in order to support the child to learn more and to progress. So the scaffolding refers to the context by which those who are more knowledgeable, such as adults or other children, are helping the learners to develop their cognitive skills. So, and this is in any learning experience, whether it is to learn how to ride a bike, an instrument, how to learn how to read, how to learn how to tie your shoelaces, to learn how to go to the toilet, how to eat and use chopsticks or fork and knife. All these, are learning experiences. So our role as teachers or teaching assistants or parents or psychologists or educators is to identify the level that the child is now, and then through scaffolding, helping the child to progress. So work together with the child in order to progress. So what is important is that the adults or whoever is teaching should pull away from the scaffolding gradually so that the pupil can progress and can have the sense that they can do things independently. But they can't live completely, because then if you think of a scaffold, the child will fall. So sometimes the educators get it wrong and either put the scaffold too close so there is no progress, or they create a big gap and the pupil can't catch up. And if we think about it as an example, think about a scaffold. The scaffold like in the picture, that it has like steps. If we want to teach a child who doesn't know how to write their name, we want to teach them how to write their name. If we say we need to think about breaking this into steps, first we will do the letter formation, how to write each letter, then how to put them together in order, then to put it on a line so that it's straight, than being able to read it. So we need to have these steps. These are the steps in the scaffold. If we put the steps to get too close together, so let's say every day we ask the child to write the first letter, and then we don't move up, then they will not progress, because every day they will be doing the same thing. They will be on the same level. If we say, give them a piece of paper and say, write your name, without providing any steps or any scaffolding, then this is too difficult. They can't do it. So we need to work with the child to identify what is it they can do and what is it that they cannot do. And then we create steps and we teach step by step. And let's say on Monday, we teach something new. We teach the first letter. And then on Tuesday, we are going to do a repetition and revision of the first letter and add the second. And then on Wednesday, we're going to do the letter from Monday, the letter from Tuesday, and the third letter. And then slowly, we build up. And that's very important for all children, not only for children with special educational needs. We all learn the same way. When you learned, how many of you know how to drive a car? Can you put your hands up? Does anyone know how to drive a car? No, a few of you. If, for example, the instructor gave you the car and said, get in the car and drive, you would probably crash. First, you need to sit, know what to press, know how to use the steering wheel. So it's all these little steps that we need to identify and then build up. So Tharp and Gallimore discussed about scaffolding, and they said that the teachers can use different ways in order to scaffold and support the children. And one is modeling. And I think that we all do that a little bit, you know, to show how to do something. If you ask your friend, how do I save this document on the cloud? Most likely they will show you. If you ask your violin teacher, how do I play this string? Then they will show you. If you ask Kat, how do I make a poster or a presentation? She's going to show you one that she already has to model what it is like. So modeling and showing how to do things is working. The other thing that is working is what people call feeding back, the feedback. But what I also believe, feed forward. So, for example, if you write an essay for university, you know, you have to write an essay, and then your marker says, oh, you discussed very well this theory, and you discussed very well that, but you don't get an A, you get a B. Then this is feedback. They are telling you what you did, but they are not telling you the feed forward, what you could have done to get a better grade. So feedback is good if you say to a child, oh, yes, you wrote that okay. But what you also need to do is feed forward. You need to say, this was written okay, but if you write it like this, it's going to be better. It's going to give you a better grade. So it's important to give this next step, the feed forward. What is it we need to do better? Something else that also is very helpful is contingency management. And this is when we manage the steps. So it's good when we break things into smaller chunks and we have step-by-step teaching. And then we need to reinforce and motivate the child after every step, not wait for the final. And actually, Vygotsky was someone who talked a lot about how it is important to reinforce the process. So if, for example, you have a maths problem, and then the child has done half a page of calculations, all correct, But at the end, instead of saying 9 plus 1 equals 10, they say 9 plus 1 equals 11. The outcome is wrong. But if the whole other calculation is right, we need to reinforce the child. We need to say, well done for trying, well done for getting that right. We need to give them a few points. If the whole activity is 5 points, then maybe we give them 2 points for getting everything right until the end. And this is giving motivation to the child to keep going, to keep wanting to learn. The other strategy that teachers can use is directing. Imagine if you are a director and you were directing a movie. You would tell the actors and the actresses where to stand, where to smile. Imagine if you were doing a TikTok video with your friends. You would say, okay, smile there, talk to the camera, look there. This is something we can do with children in the class as well. We can guide them. So if the child needs to learn how to tie their shoes, their shoelaces, rather than doing it for them, we can direct them. We can say, make a loop with your one hand, make a loop with the other, put the string through. So we talk them through rather than doing it for them, so that they learn from hearing and vision. We question them, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. We question them, if they say, I don't know the answer, you say, okay, what do you think the answer is? How can you find the response? And I'm going to give you an example in a minute. We can explain to them, and I think we all do that, explaining things over and over, because repetition is something that is helping us with learning. Remember the list we made at the beginning of the session, repeating and having opportunities to practice is important. And as we said, task structuring, having one thing at a time. So the target is to finish learning how to form letters before being able to write your name. So we're structuring the task and breaking into smaller chunks. So when we're thinking about questioning, we want to teach children strategies about what they can do when they don't know the answer. So if they are there and they, especially children with special educational needs, or any of us, if we are having to solve a problem that we don't know the answer to, we need to know how to get help. So first you may think, how can you find out about XYZ? How can I find out about this? Can I search on the internet? Can I open a book? Can I ask someone else? Think about who can help me. Is it going to be the teacher? Is it going to be my parent? Is it going to be another child that knows better? What do I already know? What from this information, what is it that I already know that would help me move to the next step? And what did I do the last time I got stuck? I went to Miss, or I asked my mom, or I talked to the violin teacher. So getting the children to know what to do when they have a problem is going to help them with their self-esteem, with their mental health, but also to move on with learning. So a strategy to know what to do, because very often, if we see something that's very difficult for us, we give up. We don't even try. But if children are prepared and they know that, okay, if something is very difficult, I have these questions I can ask myself, and then I'm going to start slowly move on, then this is going to be very helpful at all circumstances. A strategy that is really helping, especially with reading, is what we call reciprocal teaching. So what this is doing, this strategy, is that it's helping children to break in smaller chunks and become more active and confident when they are having to read or understand the text. And what is important to understand is that usually in the early years, we are learning how to read. Yeah. So we are teaching children how to read and the process of reading. But after around year 2 or year 3, what the children are doing is they are reading in order to learn. Yeah. So at the beginning, we teach them how to read in order for them to then read in order to learn. You don't give kindergarten children a history textbook to read because they can't read. First, we need to teach them how to read. Once they know how to read, then they will read in order to learn more. And that's the same with special educational needs children. If they don't know how to read, they won't be able to learn from their reading. So we need to go back to the basics. So children should be able to ask and answer questions for a text. It's not good enough just to be able to read accurately, read correct. We need to understand and answer questions about what we've read. Then to summarize what they've read. Oh, what do you think this story was about? Who can tell me? Even if you are reading a story to the children, you can ask, what was the story about? And get a summary. You can clarify what they have heard or what they've read to make sure that they understand they've heard correctly. And then something that's very helpful is getting them to predict what is going to happen next. Because when children learn to predict what's going to happen next, we are pushing their brain to think of next steps. We're pushing their brain to think forward, to process the information they have. So if, for example, I said to you, next time I see you, bring your towels and swimming suits. If I don't give you any more information, you don't know what we're going to do, but you are predicting that we may go swimming because I've told you to bring towels and swimming suits. So helping the children to think and understand about next steps and predict what is going to come next is very good proof of understanding. Something else that is helping, especially with children who have emotional difficulties, they may be anxious or they may have trauma or they may have depression or like emotional difficulties, is storytelling. Because if you ask children to tell you a story and explain what they are feeling via a story, then it's easier to do it. Because usually children will not come and say, I am angry, or I am happy, or I am frustrated. So if you get them to tell you a story, it's more likely to understand what they want to say, and to help them use the language for the feelings, to learn to use the I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm angry. And for special educational needs children, this may be done using pictures or using signs if they don't have the language. So if the child tells you a story, it feels a bit more respectful rather than saying what happened to you. Maybe it's easier to express. And it's giving them the hope and the possibility to build coping mechanisms. So something that all teachers say have a problem with in the class is behaviors. And when we talk about behaviors in psychology, we don't mean bad behavior. So behavior is you eating crisps is a behavior. You sitting there listening to me is a behavior. You sleeping is a behavior, So when we talk about behavior, we talk about everything that we are doing, not bad behavior. So in all the behaviors happen for a reason, either because we want to get attention. So when we are in a class and we put our hand up, it's because we want the attention of the teacher. If a child is crying after they fall down and hurt themselves, their behavior is crying because they want to manage and regulate their emotions. If a child says, I have a bellyache today because there is a spelling test, is because they behave that way because they are afraid of the test. And usually in children with special educational needs, a behavior happens because they want to feel a habitual need. You may have seen children, especially with autism, that may rock back and forth or jump up and down, or they may flap their hands or do specific things. So these behaviors are helping them manage their emotions and fill in the needs. So what we want is we want all the positive behaviors to increase and all the negative behaviors to decrease. So if we are thinking about how can we make a positive behavior increase, and the positive behavior can be that the child is reading nicely, is listening to you, is sitting on the chair, is showing good learning, then by positive reinforcement, saying, praising them, saying why they've done a good job, by smiling at them, by playing with them, we are helping them increase this positive behavior of learning. And the most important thing is consistency. Everybody needs to follow the same routine, the same language, and the same behavior. So when we talk about reinforcement, we have primary and secondary reinforcement. The primary reinforcement is food and drink because it's satisfying primary needs. And the secondary has to do with toys, verbal praise, and tickles or stickers, whatever you have. So reinforcement needs to be exactly after the behavior and frequent. So sometimes I go to the supermarket and a child is misbehaving and the parent says, oh, wait till we get home and I will show you, but that's not good enough. We need to have the consequence there and then. If you are in a classroom and you have a child that has done something very good, it's there. You need to give them the sticker, the food, or whatever is the reinforcement. Don't say, wait until the break to get it. We need to be quick. We need to promote play, especially in the early years. Very often and in many countries, there is a lot of overload of learning. And we don't let children play. We forget that play is very, very important in child development because children develop loads of skills through play. They relive experiences within the safe environment. They can use the toys to symbolize the real world. They can express their feelings. They can use their imagination. And we can use these opportunities to teach them as well through play. So it's important to allow the children time to play. And it's important for us to have fun with them. It's beautiful as a teacher to be able to play with the child. If we create a positive environment, a supportive environment, so that the child can play with us and with other children. And then when the child is playing, we can use to describe what they are doing. We may be able to teach them a few things, but never to criticize. Oh, we don't play like that. We don't do this. Always we need to encourage imagination, to reward and praise the appropriate play, and let them and encourage them to do problem solving. It's very important for children to learn to problem solve. So when we're talking about rewards and reinforcements and play, we need to reward every time. We need to show the children that we expect them to be successful. So you remember what we said, that sometimes when a child has special educational needs, then as parents or as teachers, we don't have high expectations. We say, oh, they can't do that because they have autism. This is not right. We need to believe that children can succeed at all times, and always try to push them and support them with a lot of rewarding and encouragement and reinforcement and understanding, not to punish, but to just teach them what is the right behavior. So when we praise them, we need to praise even the ordinary behaviors. So children with special educational needs need to be praised for sitting down nicely, even though that's what you expect from all the other children. The other children can do it, but the child with special educational needs may not be able to do it. So when they do sit nicely and listen to you, you need to say, oh, well done for sitting nicely. Thank you. And be generous with your praise and say, well done for sitting nicely. Thank you for reading from the book. Well done for paying attention. Being quite enthusiastic and genuine. Remember what you said at the beginning. In order to learn, you need someone who loves teaching you, who is enthusiastic and happy to teach and wants to pass their knowledge. So always increase the praise, especially for children with special educational needs. And here I've put a few suggestions of what you can say. We're really proud of you. Wow, fantastic. Get a gold star, brilliant. Different ways that we can use to praise in the classroom. When we talked about token economy and contingency management, you may be using these visual sticker points where children may be getting stickers every time they do something good in order to get something really good at the end. So, for example, if a child likes playing on the computer, you can say, if you do, if you get 5 stickers, you will be able to play at the computer. So they can get a sticker for sitting down, they get a sticker for holding their pen nicely, they get a sticker for writing their name. And when they collect the stickers, then they get a bigger reward, which can be playing on the computer. So these are things that you can use in the classroom or one-to-one with special educational needs children. So these are the strategies that will increase the good behaviors, the learning behaviors, the positive ones. What can we do when we have bad behaviors, though, when we have behaviors that are not appropriate? The child not paying attention or hurting others or running away or, not sitting down. So there are some strategies that you can use. Some are planned to ignore specific behaviors or redirect them in the right way, to give them time out or, help them to problem solve, put clear boundaries and rules. So let's look at this in detail. How can we ignore a child? Ignoring means I don't pay any attention to the behavior. I mean, if the child is doing something that is very bad, hurting another child, you can't ignore it. As a teacher or a parent, you need to step in. But if the behavior isn't very important, then by ignoring it, you are not giving attention, then the child will eventually stop. So you can start by ignoring or distracting the child. So, for example, if you have a child that is knocking on the table and is making a noise, rather than telling them stop knocking, what you can do is say, oh, can you come and help me move this table or this chair? So you are redirecting them to do something else that is more appropriate. If the child is swearing or is having a tantrum or is crying or pulling a face, you can ignore these. There is nothing going to happen if you just ignore them. You can, of course, give them a lot of attention and eye contact when they are behaving well, but completely ignore them when they are misbehaving. Then it's important to set limits and boundaries. So very often what we see classrooms is people repeating the child's name. So they say, oh, Johnny, 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 listen to me, Johnny, Johnny. Now think about it. If someone kept using your name, your brain would just keep getting hit with your name and be alert. And this creates uncomfortable feelings. So it's very less likely to respond. So it's important to have specific commands and saying things in a good, polite, positive way, but allow the child some time to respond. So what you can do is you can be polite, but not ask. Sometimes in classrooms, I see teachers say, can you please sit down? Or can you write this from the board? Now, the point is that when you ask a question, you give a choice to the child. So the child can say, no, I can't sit down, or no, I don't want to write from the board. That's why we should never ask. We should always state, sit down, please. Copy this from the board, please. You are still polite and kind, but you are not giving them a choice. You are expecting to see that behavior happening. So you need to give them time to respond and do what you're asking them to do. And then something that works very well is to teach them, if this, then this. So, for example, you can tell a child, if you write this activity peacefully, then you can play on the computer for 5 minutes. If you go on the line, then you can be the first to have food. If you do your homework, then you can be the classroom assistant for the day. So you teach them that for everything good thing they do, there is going to be a positive consequence after. And then the children learn, oh, if I do this, then this will happen. And if they link the positive behaviors with something positive, then they will do it again and again. So we need to teach children to solve their problems by telling them their feelings. You can say, oh, I understand you are upset, or you are angry. Let's give you a bit of time to calm down. So helping the children to define their problem, what is the problem, and then how they feel about it, we can then help them to find a solution. It's important to show that we understand children and we respect them and we validate their feelings. We are there to listen to them. It's very important. And for some children, especially when they are really angry, what helps is to help them to think calm, or to breathe in through their nose and count to 3, and then out of their mouth and count to 3, or feel that they are making a lemon juice and do squeezing lemon hands, because this is supporting the children to focus and get rid of the negative emotions. And of course, always catching the child to be good, always remind them that something positive is going to come if they behave in a good way. So if you are in a classroom and you need to put a behavior support plan in place, the first thing you need to do is identify what is the problem behavior. So maybe the problem behavior is screaming in the classroom or not paying attention. Then gather information, talk to the teacher, talk to the child, observe the child when they are in the break time or in different classrooms or different environments. Think, why do you think that behavior is happening? What is the way to stop it? Which strategy are we going to use to stop it? And then how can we support everyone to have the same consistent behavior towards this child? But also think, before choosing a behavior management approach, that in order to be successful, you need consistency at home, at school, at church, at the gym, at all the different environments. And you need to identify 1 or 2 problems at a time. You can't deal with everything in one go. Remember, as a teacher or as an early years educator or psychologist, you have all these other people and children to deal with. So identify what is the most important behavior to deal with. Usually, if the child is violent, this is the first behavior we are trying to stop, the violence, because it may hurt the child, the other children, and the teacher. Then we need to be patient and enthusiastic to show to the child that we love them and care for them. And then we need to choose our rewards, reinforcements, carefully so that the child is motivated. So any intervention you follow should be targeted and focused. So you need to identify exactly what is it that you're trying to achieve, exactly what is the focus of this activity and what we want the child to be able to do at the end. We need interventions to be evidence-based, so it's good to use strategies that have been proven, but also to remember that not everything works with every child. Today I've given you some strategies. I'm not saying these strategies will work with every child, every special educational needs child in the world. Some will work for some and some will work for others. So you need to try and see what works with each child, because every child is individual and we need to tailor our intervention to the child's needs. Remember, if we do have to develop a plan for a child, if we do the graph we said, child in the middle, all the factors that contribute, strengths, weaknesses, then design an intervention that is individual for that child. And then what we need to do is monitor the progress, We need to check with the teachers, the parents, everyone else. Is it working? Is it something else that we need to do in order to make it easier for the child? And something that's important, but very often we do not pay enough attention, is the parental involvement. And in the UK, there is an intervention called structured conversation, because it's very important to understand that as a teacher, you only have the child at school for 6 or 7 hours. After that, they are with their parents. So you need to have good relationship with the parent to be able to communicate, to tell the parent the strategies that are working, to understand what is it that the parent wants for their child. If you have a parent of a child who has Down syndrome, they can't tell you, I want my child to become a doctor, because we know they can't. We need to work with the parent to manage their expectations and for the teacher to understand what it is that the child can and cannot learn. So you need to identify what is the responsibility of the parent, what is the responsibility of the teacher, what is the responsibility of the child when they are in the school or at home, and how can we support them? What are the activities that they need to be able to do? And meet with the parents, have these discussions, this honest communication. If something happens in class, how are we going to communicate it with the parent so that you can work together to support the child? So we talked about interventions for teachers and parents. We talked about the relationship between the two. What can the leaders do? And this is, I think, important because you said at the beginning, it's very important for policy, for education leaders, for laws to protect children with special educational needs, but also to protect their parents and the children themselves and the teachers. So we need to promote positive attitudes and behaviors of staff towards equity, equality, diversity. We need to respect all children regardless of their needs. We need the education leaders to give a voice to the children, to give a voice to the teachers who know best because they have the children in the classroom, to give a voice to the parents as well. We need them to promote inclusive education, inclusive pedagogy. And we need the teachers and the teaching assistants or whoever is working with the child to have the right training, to have the right specialist training. So the schools, the local authorities, the governments need to provide the budgets for this. We need teachers and parents to be less rigid with the curriculum. It's not important for every single child to know their shapes and numbers and letters if they can't do they can't do simple things like eating independently, going to the toilet independently, being able to sleep, show their needs. So we need a good promotion of the curriculum to be accurate and right for each child's needs. We need most likely better environments. Remember what we said at the beginning. In order for learning to take place, we need to have resources, we need to have the training, we need to have everything we need in order to be able to promote education, learning, and inclusivity within the school. We need to prioritize interventions and treatments that are working. So if the government is having budgets for special educational needs children, what are these budgets spent on? What can the school use? What can go to specialists? We need general awareness from the public and the community within the school and outside. Parents need to feel safe and proud to say, oh, my child has a special need, or for people to say, I have a mental health difficulty, and for other people to respect them and understand that this is a difficulty and to be able to support them. We want the schools to adopt an inclusive ethos, to respect all learners regardless of their needs, and to provide education for all. Not use the special educational needs as an excuse for not providing the interventions and the education. And then we want the government to encourage reasonable adjustments to schools, to allow the school to make reasonable adjustments to meet the children's needs. Okay, so this is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Effie. Effie, I like your presentation because the content is so rich, and also you gave a lot of examples to help my student to understand the content. I think it's very insightful, and also at the same time is very thought-provoking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you. Very kind of you.